My brother crashed my car. My parents bought him a new one and handed me the repair bill. They regretted that choice years later. The repair estimate was still warm from the printer when my father slid it across the kitchen table and told me that family meant knowing when to let things go. The number at the bottom was $18,742. My brother had put my car through the brick wall of a closed pharmacy less than 48 hours earlier. He had no permission to drive it, no insurance that covered it, and enough alcohol in his system that the police had taken his license on the spot. Yet my parents had already decided that the bill belonged to me. Behind my father, visible through the kitchen window, a silver SUV sat in the driveway with a red bow tied across its hood. That was Tyler's new car. My mother noticed where I was looking and folded her hands as though she were about to explain something to a child. Tyler needed reliable transportation, she said. His job was 20 minutes away. The accident had shaken his confidence, and forcing him to depend on buses would only make it harder for him to get back on his feet. My car, on the other hand, was an old vehicle I had chosen to own. Old vehicles required repairs. That was simply part of being an adult. I was 24, and in that moment I understood that adulthood in my family meant paying for the damage caused by the person they refused to hold responsible. The car was a 1967 Mustang Fastback, dark green beneath 3 decades of neglect. It had belonged to my Aunt Rebecca, my father's older sister, and the only adult in my childhood who had ever asked what I wanted before telling me what I should want. She had bought it used when she was 19, driven it across 7 states, and kept it even after arthritis made the stiff clutch painful. When cancer took her, she left the car to me in a handwritten addendum to her will. It was not valuable when I received it. The engine seized if the weather was cold. Rust had eaten through one rear quarter panel. The seats smelled like rainwater and old vinyl. My father called it a junkyard with wheels, and Tyler laughed when I spent weekends in a rented garage cleaning bolts, labeling wires, and teaching myself skills from repair manuals. For 4 years, I put nearly every spare dollar into that car. I worked days at a fleet maintenance office and evenings doing bookkeeping for a neighborhood body shop. The shop owner, Mr. Alvarez, let me use an empty bay after closing in exchange for organizing his invoices. He taught me how metal changed under heat, how to hear a bad bearing before it failed, and how to tell honest work from shiny work. I rebuilt the Mustang slowly because I could not afford to make careless mistakes. 3 weeks before Tyler crashed it, I had finally finished. I had not even taken the formal photographs for the agreed value insurance policy. The specialist insurer had approved the application, but required an appraisal scheduled for the following Monday. Until then, the car remained on my ordinary policy, which valued it like an aging piece of transportation rather than a restored classic. Tyler knew all of this. He had heard me explain it at dinner after my mother asked why I would waste money insuring an old car for more than a new one. On Saturday night, while I was covering an emergency inventory shift, Tyler entered my apartment with the spare key my mother had persuaded me to give her. She claimed it was for emergencies. He took the Mustang key from a ceramic dish inside my kitchen cupboard, drove to a party, and used my car to impress people who had never shown interest in him when he arrived in his usual dented sedan. Near 2 in the morning, he missed a turn, jumped a curb, crossed a strip of dead landscaping, and hit the pharmacy wall. The front end folded, the steering column shifted, the frame twisted badly enough that the first tow operator told me to sell it for parts. Tyler walked away with a bruised shoulder and a charge for driving under the influence. My parents called that a miracle. They did not call the theft of my keys a crime. They called it a misunderstanding. At the kitchen table, I read every page of the estimate while my father waited for me to react. The shop had listed frame alignment, suspension replacement, engine inspection, sheet metal fabrication, paint matching, and dozens of smaller items. The estimate did not include the possibility of hidden damage. It also did not include the $7,000 the lender still expected me to repay on the restoration loan. My mother said they had spoken to an attorney about Tyler's situation. His legal fees and fines would be significant. The SUV had been necessary because the old sedan was no longer safe, and because Tyler could not be expected to rebuild his life without support. They had used part of their home equity line for the down payment. There was nothing left to contribute toward my repair. I asked why Tyler had not attended this family meeting. My father said he was resting. I asked whether Tyler had apologized. My mother's expression tightened. He felt terrible, she assured me, but he was embarrassed and did not need me making the situation more painful. Then my father tapped the estimate and said the sentence that stayed with me long after I stopped wishing for an apology. He said, "You are the careful one, Leah. You will figure it out." The careful child in a family is often treated like an emergency fund with a heartbeat. Every responsible choice becomes evidence that she can absorb one more consequence. Every boundary becomes cruelty because everyone is accustomed to spending her patience without asking. I looked at the new SUV. I looked at the bill. Then I asked for the spare key to my apartment. My mother blinked and said this was not the time to become dramatic. I repeated the request. When she claimed she had left it at home, I opened the locksmith's website on my phone and scheduled a lock change for that afternoon. My father called it an insult. I told him that somebody had entered my home, taken my property, and destroyed it. Removing access was not an insult. It was the smallest rational response. They kept talking after that, but something in me had gone quiet. I put the estimate in my bag, stood, and left without touching the envelope my father had prepared. I learned later that it contained the SUV financing paperwork. They wanted me to sign as a witness because Tyler was still sleeping. The Mustang sat behind Mr. Alvarez's shop beneath a gray tarp. When we pulled the tarp back, the damage looked worse in daylight. The hood had buckled into a sharp ridge. One headlight pointed toward the ground. Flecks of red brick were trapped in the grill Aunt Rebecca had once polished with an old toothbrush. Mr. Alvarez did not offer false comfort. He walked around the car twice, crouched by the front rail, and said it could be rebuilt, but not cheaply and not quickly. If I paid a full commercial rate, the numbers would never make sense. If I did most of the labor and accepted that it might take years, the decision became less financial and more personal. I told him I wanted to save it. He nodded once, as if I had answered a question about who I intended to be. The insurance company denied most of the claim because Tyler was an unlisted, unauthorized driver, and because the police report documented intoxication. They paid for damage to the pharmacy wall under a provision I barely understood, then warned that my premium would rise. The prosecutor offered Tyler a plea agreement that included probation, community service, alcohol counseling, and restitution to the pharmacy's insurer. My car was treated as a family dispute because my parents insisted I had previously allowed him to drive it. That was untrue, but Tyler repeated their version. I could have pursued him in civil court. A lawyer explained that I had a strong claim and a weak chance of collecting. Tyler had little income, substantial debt, and parents prepared to protect every asset he touched. A judgment might follow him for years, but litigation would cost money I needed to preserve the car. I filed the police supplement stating that he had taken it without permission. I saved the estimate, photographs, messages, and insurance correspondence. Then I made a decision my parents mistook for surrender. I stopped asking them to be fair. For the next 16 months, I lived with almost nothing unnecessary. I moved from my one-bedroom apartment into a room above Mr. Alvarez's shop that had once stored upholstery samples. The radiator clanged all winter. The only window faced an alley, and every morning at 6, I woke to the sound of the bakery next door rolling metal racks across concrete. I worked my regular job, took every bookkeeping client I could find, and spent nights dismantling the Mustang down to its bones. My parents told relatives I was punishing them by withdrawing. In reality, I was simply no longer available for the role they had assigned me. I skipped Sunday dinners because Tyler attended in his new SUV and complained about the ignition interlock device he had to blow into before it would start. I declined my mother's requests to help organize his court documents. I refused my father's suggestion that I lend Tyler money after his hours were cut. The family response followed a familiar pattern. First, they called me angry, then selfish, then unstable. When none of those words brought me back, they began acting as if I had always been distant. Tyler sent one apology by text 6 months after the crash. It consisted of 2 sentences. He said he was sorry the situation had gotten out of hand and hoped I could stop holding one bad night over everyone forever. An hour later, my mother called to ask whether I had thanked him for reaching out. I saved the text beside the other records and did not answer. Working on the car became an education no school could have designed. Mr. Alvarez taught me repairs, but the business around those repairs taught me more. I watched insurance adjusters reward shops that documented precisely and punish those that relied on verbal agreements. I saw small delivery companies lose thousands because they had no system for tracking preventive maintenance. I saw owners buy impressive vehicles while ignoring the service schedules that would keep those vehicles earning money. At my day job, I managed maintenance records for a regional plumbing company with 83 vans. Their system was a maze of spreadsheets, sticky notes, and memory. One missed inspection caused a brake failure that injured no one, but put 3 vans out of service during the company's busiest week. I built a simple scheduling database in my spare time and linked mileage, service history, driver reports, and vendor estimates. Breakdowns fell by nearly a third within 6 months. The owner gave me a raise and asked if I could build the same system for his friend's landscaping business. That second company became my first outside client. The third was a courier service. By the fifth, I realized I was earning more from weekend consulting than from bookkeeping. I named the business Rebecca Fleet Solutions, using my aunt's first name because every useful thing in my life seemed connected to her refusal to dismiss what other people overlooked. I did not become successful overnight. For 2 years, success looked like eating noodles at midnight beside a spreadsheet, and then sanding primer until my wrists ached. It looked like presenting to skeptical managers who assumed I was an assistant until I began explaining their cost-per-mile data better than they could. It looked like being paid late, correcting my own early mistakes, and learning how to say that advice was not free merely because I delivered it politely. The Mustang changed alongside the business. I found a donor front clip in Arizona, a correct hood in Ohio, and original trim pieces from a retired mechanic who had kept them wrapped in newspaper since 1986. Mr. Alvarez and I straightened what could be saved and replaced what could not. I chose a deep Highland green close to the original, but with a subtle warmth under sunlight. I rebuilt the engine for reliability rather than showmanship. Every repaired section carried evidence of the crash, if you knew where to look, but the evidence no longer controlled the shape of the whole car. 3 years after the accident, I drove it out of the shop. Mr. Alvarez stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. He had seen hundreds of cars leave that building, but his eyes shone when the engine settled into a steady idle. I drove first to Aunt Rebecca's grave, parked beneath the sycamore tree, and sat with both hands on the steering wheel. I did not tell her I had restored what she left me. I told her I had finally understood why she left it to me. She had not given me a perfect car. She had given me something worth learning how to save. That year, Rebecca Fleet Solutions signed its first major contract with a grocery distributor. I hired 2 analysts and rented an office across from the body shop. Within 18 months, we were overseeing maintenance strategy for more than 1,200 commercial vehicles across 4 states. Our software flagged abnormal repair patterns, negotiated service rates, and helped companies decide whether to repair, retire, lease, or replace equipment. The work was not glamorous, which was one reason competitors underestimated it. A delivery van that avoided 2 days of downtime did not make headlines. Multiply that van by 5,000 vehicles, however, and the savings became large enough to reshape budgets. My parents heard about the business through relatives. My mother sent a congratulations card addressed to "Our Little Entrepreneur" and included a newspaper clipping as if I had not been the person interviewed. My father left a voicemail saying he had always known I was capable. Tyler liked the company page on social media and sent a message suggesting we should collaborate someday because he was getting into logistics. I did not respond, but I paid attention. Tyler's path after the crash looked very different from the crisis my parents had predicted. His employer did not fire him. My father persuaded a family friend to give him a better sales position after probation. The new SUV became the first in a series of vehicles my parents helped him purchase or refinance. Whenever he accumulated enough debt to feel pressure, they found a way to convert his emergency into a family investment. He eventually started a company called Northline Last Mile, delivering appliances and high-end furniture for retailers. My father used retirement savings as seed money. My mother handled payroll without pay. Their house secured the first commercial credit line. Tyler called himself a founder and described the business as self-made. Northline grew quickly because Tyler was persuasive, energetic, and willing to promise delivery windows his competitors considered impossible. He leased trucks faster than he hired qualified managers. He underpriced contracts to gain market share and postponed maintenance when cash became tight. From the outside, the company looked impressive. Its blue trucks appeared across the city. Tyler posted photographs from warehouse openings and wrote long captions about risk, vision, and building something from nothing. From the inside, according to people in the industry, Northline was a machine running hot without gauges. I kept my distance. Our firms operated in adjacent spaces, but I instructed my sales team not to pursue Northline as a client. I did not want family history inside my contracts. When one of Tyler's dispatch managers applied to work for me, I interviewed her only after confirming that she had no restrictive agreement. She described missed services, falsified inspection dates, and drivers pressured to ignore warning lights. I documented the conversation as I would with any applicant and advised her to report safety concerns to the appropriate agency. 2 months later, Northline had its first serious accident. A box truck lost steering on an interstate ramp and rolled onto its side. The driver survived with a broken arm. The investigation found a worn component that should have been replaced during a service Northline's records claimed had occurred. The repair vendor denied performing it. Tyler blamed an administrative error and announced a company-wide safety review. My parents called me that evening for the first time in almost a year. My father said Northline needed someone with my expertise. He made it sound like an opportunity for me to demonstrate maturity. My mother said Tyler was under enormous pressure and that a sister should not wait for an invitation when her brother needed help. I asked whether they wanted to hire my company. There was a pause. My father said they had expected me to look at the records as a favor. I explained that Rebecca Fleet Solutions did not perform unpaid compliance reviews, especially for companies facing active investigations. We would require an engagement letter, a conflict waiver, and an initial retainer. I quoted the standard emergency rate. My mother sounded wounded. She asked how I could put a price on my brother's future. I told her Tyler had put a price on my car years earlier. It was $18,742, and they had decided I could handle it. Then I ended the call. They hired a cheaper consultant. Northline survived the investigation with fines, higher insurance costs, and a corrective action plan. Tyler told relatives I had tried to exploit his accident for profit. I did not defend myself at family gatherings because I no longer attended them, and because the truth did not require unanimous approval to remain true. Over the next 4 years, my company expanded nationally. We developed predictive maintenance tools that combined telematics with actual service records rather than relying on manufacturer intervals alone. A private equity firm offered to buy us. I declined and instead sold a minority stake to an employee ownership trust. The transaction allowed me to pay off every debt, buy the building that housed our offices, and give Mr. Alvarez enough money to retire without selling his shop to a chain. I kept the Mustang in a glass-walled bay on the ground floor, not as decoration but as a reminder. New employees heard the short version. A damaged car had taught the founder that neglected maintenance and unassigned responsibility always became more expensive later. They did not hear about Tyler. A company should not be built as a monument to one person's cruelty. By the time I was 34, Rebecca Fleet Solutions managed or advised on nearly 20,000 vehicles. Our largest client was Meridian Home Group, a national retailer preparing to consolidate its delivery contracts. Meridian's executives wanted one primary logistics partner for 6 states, a deal projected to be worth more than $200 million over 5 years. Northline was one of 3 finalists. I learned that at a quarterly strategy meeting when Meridian's operations chief, Daniel Cho, placed the bidder list on the screen. My company had been retained to conduct the independent fleet, safety, and continuity evaluation. The board wanted our recommendation before choosing a carrier. Tyler's company name appeared between 2 much larger firms. For a few seconds, I heard the old pharmacy alarm from the night of the crash shrill behind the police tape. Then the feeling passed. I told the team there was a personal conflict and disclosed it fully. Daniel already knew Tyler was my brother. Meridian's counsel had reviewed the issue and wanted our firm to continue because our scoring system was auditable and because removing us after bids were opened could create its own appearance problem. I offered to recuse myself from scoring Northline and appoint an outside reviewer. Meridian agreed to the outside reviewer, but required me to remain accountable for the final report. The rules would be the same for all bidders. Every conclusion would cite records. Every material finding would be shared with the bidder for response. No personal history would enter the analysis. That was how Tyler returned to my life. Not through reconciliation, but through a data room containing maintenance logs, driver files, lease schedules, insurance claims, and financial statements. Northline looked healthier on paper than industry rumors suggested. Revenue had risen sharply. On-time delivery metrics were excellent. Its fleet was newer than either competitor's. Tyler had used growth capital to lease dozens of trucks in the previous 18 months, and glossy photographs made the equipment appear immaculate. The underlying records told a different story. Maintenance expenses were far below what a fleet of that size should require. Odometer data did not match service intervals. Several invoices repeated identical parts and labor codes across vehicles in different cities. Inspection forms bore signatures from mechanics who, according to licensing databases, had not worked at the listed shops on those dates. More concerning was a pattern involving accidents. Northline classified several collisions as driver misconduct and charged repair costs back to employees through payroll deductions. In at least 4 cases, telematics showed mechanical warnings before the incidents. The company had replaced the vehicles afterward, but left drivers with damaged records and unpaid bills. My outside reviewer, a former transportation regulator named Simone Grant, summarized the pattern in one sentence. Northline did not manage risk, she said. It reassigned risk to whoever had the least power to refuse it. I thought of the estimate sliding across my parents' table. We sent Northline a formal request for clarification. Tyler responded through counsel, calling the discrepancies legacy record-keeping issues. He offered updated documents. The updates resolved minor questions and created larger ones. Metadata showed that dozens of inspection files had been generated after our request, though they were dated months earlier. Simone recommended an on-site audit. The visit was scheduled for a Thursday morning. I did not plan to attend, but Meridian's counsel asked me to join after Northline challenged Simone's authority. When I arrived at the main warehouse, Tyler was waiting in the lobby beneath a wall-sized photograph of himself, shaking hands with the mayor. He had aged into our father. Same controlled smile, same habit of leaning forward as if confidence could change the terms of a conversation. He opened his arms for a hug. I offered my hand. He laughed lightly and told the receptionist that his sister had always been formal. The tour lasted 3 hours. Northline's managers answered questions carefully. The warehouse was clean, the active trucks polished, the safety posters newly printed. But behind a fenced section of the yard, Simone found 11 vehicles listed as operational in the bid documents. Several had missing panels. One had a cracked axle housing. Another showed fire damage around the engine compartment. Tyler said they were awaiting disposal and blamed a spreadsheet error. In the maintenance office, we requested original work orders. The supervisor brought binders that smelled of fresh toner. Simone asked to see the shop's appointment calendar and parts receipts. The supervisor looked at Tyler before answering. That glance mattered more than any speech. By late afternoon, Northline's attorney demanded that we suspend the audit. Meridian's counsel refused. We left with copies of the records Northline had agreed in advance to provide, and a written list of missing material. Tyler followed me into the parking lot. He said I had made my point. He admitted the company had grown faster than its systems, but insisted nobody was perfect. The Meridian contract would give him enough stable revenue to fix everything. If my report cost him the deal, hundreds of employees could lose their jobs, our parents could lose their home, and I would have to live with knowing I had destroyed my own family over an old grudge. For years, I had imagined what I might say if he ever acknowledged the connection between the car and the life I built afterward. In those fantasies, I was eloquent. In the parking lot, I only felt tired. I told him the audit was not about my Mustang. It was about vehicles carrying employees and families on public roads. If his company needed a $200 million contract before it could afford to tell the truth, then it was not ready for the contract. He said I had become cold. I said responsibility often felt cold to people accustomed to handing it away. That evening, my parents appeared at my house. They had never visited before. They knew the address because my mother had found it on a charity board announcement. I watched them through the door camera while they stood beneath the porch light, older than the versions I carried in memory. My father held a folder against his chest. My mother looked toward the windows as if trying to estimate what the house had cost. I let them in because refusing would have created a scene with my neighbors, and because I was curious about the folder. They did not ask about my life. My father began with Northline's importance to the family. Their home secured a loan Tyler had used to cover expansion deposits. Their retirement accounts guaranteed part of a credit facility. If Meridian rejected Northline and lenders lost confidence, everything they owned could disappear. My mother said they had made sacrifices for both children. I asked her to name one sacrifice they had made for me after Tyler wrecked my car. She looked offended by the specificity of the question. She said they had given me space. I almost laughed. Abandonment had become a gift in their memory. My father opened the folder. Inside was a copy of the old repair estimate. I recognized my own notes in the margin. He had kept it, though not for the reason I first hoped. Attached was a cashier's check for $18,742. He slid it across my dining table exactly as he had slid the bill 10 years earlier. He said they were prepared to make the past right if I made sure Northline received a fair recommendation. The check did not include interest, the restoration loan, storage costs, increased insurance, or the thousands of hours of labor. More importantly, it was not an apology. It was a purchase offer for my judgment. I pushed it back. My mother began crying. She said they had spent years regretting how the accident was handled. I asked why their regret had produced a check only when Tyler needed something. She said timing did not erase sincerity. I told her sincerity usually existed before leverage. My father lost patience. He accused me of enjoying their fear. He said I had built a career from the skills I developed restoring the car, so in a way the accident had benefited me. If Tyler had not crashed it, perhaps Rebecca Fleet Solutions would never have existed. There it was, the final transformation of harm into a favor. I told him people sometimes built strong lives after being injured, but survival did not make the injury generous. Then I asked them to leave. My mother paused beside the glass doors leading to my garage. The Mustang was visible under soft ceiling lights, its green paint reflecting the room. She stared at it as though seeing a witness she had assumed was dead. She whispered that she did not know I still had it. I said that was because she had never asked. After they left, I photographed the check and wrote a disclosure memo to Meridian's counsel describing the visit. I included the amount, the attached estimate, and my parents' request. Counsel instructed me not to have further private contact with anyone connected to Northline during the evaluation. The next morning, Tyler sent an email accusing me of extortion. He claimed I had demanded repayment for the Mustang in exchange for treating Northline fairly, and that our parents had felt pressured to bring me money. His attorney copied Meridian's legal department and requested my removal. It was audacious, but not irrational. If he could convert my disclosure into evidence of bias, he might discredit the entire audit. What Tyler did not know was that my door camera recorded audio, my dining room security system logged the full conversation, and my father had stated clearly why he brought the check. I provided the recording to counsel. Meridian suspended Northline from the bid pending a formal integrity review. The decision triggered exactly the panic Tyler had predicted. Northline's lender requested updated financials. A leasing company questioned why vehicles listed as active were stored in damaged condition. An insurer opened a review of accident classifications. Drivers who had been charged for repairs began comparing records. Within a week, 3 former employees contacted Simone. One was the driver injured in the interstate rollover. He had kept photographs of dashboard warnings reported before the crash and messages from a manager ordering him to complete the route. Another employee had copies of original inspection forms that did not match those in Northline's bid. The third was a bookkeeper who claimed Tyler had created a reserve account funded by payroll deductions and used part of it for executive vehicle leases. My team separated the Meridian evaluation from the emerging allegations. We were consultants, not law enforcement. We preserved records, followed reporting obligations, and delivered findings to the appropriate parties. I reminded everyone that Northline employees were not extensions of Tyler. Their livelihoods deserved consideration, but protecting jobs could not mean concealing hazards. Tyler responded publicly. He posted a long statement about a disgruntled family member weaponizing corporate influence to settle childhood resentment. He did not name me, but local reporters identified the relationship within hours. Photographs of the Mustang appeared beside Northline trucks. Strangers debated whether I was a vindictive sister or a whistleblower. For the first time in years, I felt the old family machinery operating at scale. Tyler created a crisis. My parents framed him as the victim. I became cruel for refusing to absorb the damage quietly. The difference was that I no longer stood alone in a kitchen. Every statement in our report had supporting evidence. Every contact had been disclosed. An independent reviewer had led the audit. Meridian commissioned a second outside firm to replicate our analysis, and it reached the same conclusions. Northline's maintenance records were unreliable, its safety costs were understated, and its bid depended on assumptions that could not survive basic verification. Meridian selected another carrier. The contract loss did not destroy Northline immediately. The integrity review did. Lenders found that Tyler had counted expected Meridian revenue in borrowing projections while representing the deal internally as nearly guaranteed. Several equipment leases contained covenants triggered by material misstatements. Insurance premiums rose. Cash tightened. My father called from an unfamiliar number after counsel instructed Tyler and my parents not to contact me. I answered without thinking. He said their bank had scheduled a foreclosure review. He wanted to know whether I was satisfied. I told him I was sorry they had placed their house behind a company they did not control. He said parents were supposed to believe in their children. I said believing in Tyler had never required risking everything. They had chosen that, just as they had chosen the SUV, the legal story, and the repair bill. Love did not erase the difference between support and protection from consequences. He asked whether I would buy the debt. The request was so direct that I briefly admired it. He had researched my resources and assumed I could negotiate with the bank, preserve their home, and perhaps take security against Northline's assets. In practical terms, he wanted the careful child to become the emergency fund again. I said no. He called me heartless and hung up. 2 days later, my mother emailed a photograph of the silver SUV with the red bow from the morning they handed me the bill. I had never seen the picture before. Tyler stood beside it smiling, one arm in a sling. My parents flanked him. On the back, she had written the date and the words, "Fresh Start." Her email said she finally understood what the photograph looked like from my side. She did not ask for money. She wrote that she had found the picture while gathering documents for the bank and had sat on the bedroom floor staring at it. She remembered telling relatives that buying Tyler a car was necessary, but could not remember once asking how I got to work after my car was destroyed. She remembered worrying that Tyler felt ashamed, but not worrying that I felt betrayed. She had called me strong because it allowed her to ignore what strength cost. Then she wrote an apology without the word "but." I read it several times. It did not restore what had been lost, and it did not obligate me to return. Yet it was the first message from either parent that described their choice rather than my reaction. I saved it in a different folder from the evidence. Northline entered court-supervised restructuring 4 months later. Tyler retained a minority stake but lost operational control. The court appointed a turnaround officer who sold unprofitable routes, returned leased equipment, and negotiated settlements with drivers improperly charged for repairs. More than half the jobs survived because a regional competitor acquired the viable delivery contracts. My parents sold their house before foreclosure and moved into a smaller condominium. The sale paid the home equity debt, but consumed most of what remained of their savings. They did not become homeless. They did not become destitute. They simply lost the comfortable future they had repeatedly pledged to Tyler's emergencies. Tyler faced civil claims, regulatory penalties, and an investigation into altered records. Prosecutors ultimately charged the maintenance supervisor and Tyler with falsifying inspection documents. Tyler accepted a plea agreement that avoided prison but included probation, a substantial fine, and a prohibition against managing a commercial motor fleet for 5 years. He called me once after sentencing. Because the bid process had ended and counsel no longer barred contact, I answered. He said the punishment had gone far beyond anything he deserved. He blamed employees who had followed his instructions and investors who had demanded growth. He blamed our parents for encouraging him. Eventually, he reached the accident and said it was ridiculous that one mistake at 22 had followed him into his 30s. I told him the crash had not followed him. The choice had. He had taken something without permission, destroyed it, and allowed someone else to carry the cost. Years later, when trucks were unsafe and records were false, he had done the same thing on a larger scale. The Mustang was not a curse or a hidden weapon. It was simply the first clear example of a rule he kept applying. Tyler received the benefit. Someone else received the bill. For once, he did not interrupt. I told him our parents had taught him that consequences could be reassigned if he created enough urgency. They had failed him by rescuing him, but he had been an adult for every decision that followed. Understanding the lesson did not remove his responsibility to unlearn it. He asked whether I thought we could ever be family again. I said biology had never stopped making us family. What he wanted was access, trust, and forgiveness, and those were separate things. He would have to build them without demanding a delivery date. We ended the call without reconciliation. My relationship with my mother resumed slowly through email. For almost a year, she did not ask to visit. She told me about counseling, the condominium, and the strange quiet of a life no longer organized around Tyler's crises. She apologized for specific memories as they surfaced, giving him my birthday money when his phone broke, asking me to delay college so he could finish without loans, telling me my anger after the crash was more dangerous than his drinking. Some apologies arrived too late to repair the event they addressed. They still mattered because they prevented the lie from becoming the final version. My father wrote nothing for 11 months. Then a package arrived at my office containing Aunt Rebecca's old road atlas. I had assumed it was lost. She had marked routes in blue ink and written notes beside diners, overlooks, and cheap motels. My father included a short letter. He said he found it in the attic before the house sale and had nearly thrown it away because looking at his sister's handwriting made him ashamed. He admitted that he had resented Rebecca for leaving the Mustang to me. He had wanted Tyler to receive it because Tyler was the son who shared his interest in cars, or at least performed that interest when their father watched. When I restored the Mustang myself, my father felt displaced. After Tyler crashed it, making me pay had not been mere financial necessity. It had been punishment for proving that Rebecca had chosen correctly. That truth was uglier than the explanations they had offered, and therefore more useful. He wrote that buying Tyler the SUV had felt like restoring order. Tyler was grateful, dependent, and close. I was furious, competent, and leaving. My father had interpreted dependence as love and independence as rejection. By the time he understood the difference, he had mortgaged the house to preserve the same arrangement. He did not ask me to forgive him. He asked whether I would let him see the Mustang once before his eyesight worsened. I waited 3 weeks before answering. On a clear Saturday in October, my parents came to the office. Employees were gone, and the glass bay caught the afternoon sun. My father stopped several feet from the Mustang. His reflection hovered over the green hood, thinner and grayer than I remembered. He walked around it without touching. He noticed the corrected panel gaps, the original trim, and the slight variation in the front rail where new metal met old. At last, he said, "Rebecca would have loved it." I said she would have complained that I kept it too clean. My mother laughed softly. The sound surprised all three of us. I showed them the restoration album Mr. Alvarez had made. It included photographs of the twisted frame, the stripped shell, the replacement panels, and the first coat of paint. Near the back was a copy of the $18,742 estimate. My father looked at the page for a long time. Then he said handing me that bill was the worst financial decision he had ever made. I told him it was not the money. He nodded. He said the bill had announced a family policy. Damage flowed toward the responsible person because she was least likely to collapse under it. They had applied that policy until it cost them their house, their retirement, and both children in different ways. That was the first time I knew he understood. I did not tell him everything was forgiven. It was not. Forgiveness, for me, was not a declaration that erased the account. It was the decision to stop collecting emotional interest on a debt that could never be paid in its original currency. Trust remained smaller and conditional. Before they left, I offered them a ride. My father sat in the passenger seat. My mother took the back. I drove the Mustang along the river road Aunt Rebecca had marked in her atlas. The engine sounded steady. Autumn light flashed across the hood. Nobody spoke for several miles, and the silence felt different from the silence at the kitchen table years earlier. That one had been filled with denial. This one had room for what was true. At the overlook, my father asked what the car was worth now. I told him the insured value. He whistled, but I explained that the market price was not why I had kept it. If I sold it, the buyer would see a desirable classic with documented restoration. When I drove it, I felt every night above the shop, every invoice I had entered, every lesson Mr. Alvarez had taught me, and every mile between the woman my family expected to absorb and the woman who learned to assign costs where they belonged. The car was valuable because it had survived honestly. The repair did not pretend the collision never happened. It incorporated the damage into a structure strong enough to move forward. 2 years later, Rebecca Fleet Solutions launched a safety scholarship for young technicians entering commercial fleet maintenance. Mr. Alvarez helped select the recipients. The program focused on people who had taken indirect routes into the trade: single parents, career changers, former drivers, and students working nights. We named it the Rebecca Alvarez Technical Fellowship, combining the names of the woman who left me the car and the man who taught me to save it. At the first ceremony, my mother sat in the third row. My father attended using a cane. Tyler did not come, but he sent a note congratulating the recipients and enclosed a donation he could afford without borrowing from anyone. He had found work selling warehouse software after his management restriction. Our contact remained occasional and cautious. Once, he sent me a photograph of a 10-year-old sedan he had purchased with cash. He wrote that it was not impressive, but it was his, and the repair reserve was already funded. I replied that reliability was impressive. That exchange did not turn us into close siblings. It did show me that consequences could teach what rescue had prevented him from learning. People who heard a simplified version of our story often assumed my parents regretted choosing Tyler because I became wealthy and he failed. That interpretation missed the point. If Northline had succeeded, their choice would still have been wrong. If Rebecca Fleet Solutions had failed, the repair bill would still have belonged to the person who caused the damage. Money revealed the pattern, but money did not create it. My parents regretted their decision because, years later, they finally lived inside the rule they had made for me. Tyler created the risk. They accepted the liability. When the crash came, there was no careful daughter left at the table to receive the invoice. I did not celebrate the loss of their house. I did not need the satisfaction of watching them suffer. The most satisfying outcome was quieter. When they came to my door asking me to absorb one more consequence, I was able to say no without explaining myself into exhaustion. I could care about them and still leave the bill where it belonged. The original estimate remains in the Mustang's restoration album. The paper has yellowed slightly, and the ink is fading at the folds. Beneath the printed total, 24-year-old me wrote 3 words before leaving my parents' kitchen. Not my damage. At the time, the sentence was only anger. I thought it referred to a twisted frame, a ruined engine bay, and a number I could not afford. Now I understand it differently. The car was mine, and saving it was my choice. The labor became mine. The knowledge became mine. The company, the boundaries, and the life that followed became mine. But Tyler's decision was never mine. My parents' favoritism was never mine. Their fear, their debt, and the story they told to excuse themselves were never mine to carry. That distinction changed everything. On certain Sunday mornings, I take the Mustang out before the roads fill. I follow Aunt Rebecca's blue ink routes, stop at the diner she marked with 3 stars, and park where I can see the green hood through the window. The repaired frame tracks straight. The engine starts on the first turn. There is a faint vibration above 60 miles per hour that 3 mechanics have tried and failed to eliminate. Mr. Alvarez says old cars are allowed to remember. I think people are too. Remembering does not require returning to the scene. It does not require revenge, and it does not require pretending the wall was never there. Sometimes remembering is simply knowing whose hands held the wheel, who paid to rebuild what was broken, and why you will never again accept an invoice for someone else's choices.